All right, good evening. We're going to be learning Daf Tzadi Hey tonight. A relatively straightforward blot. Just learning a couple of sugyas. The first is finishing up the Mishnah that we started on Tzadi Dalet Amud Beis. And if you just glance up 1/3 of the way up on Tzadi Dalet Amud Beis toward the end, we were pointing out a number of things in that Mishnah which might be usher. We spoke about cutting nails on Shabbos and the leniency based on Reb Shimon ben Elazar. If you have most of a nail that's cut off and you're in pain, and on Shabbos, you're allowed to sever that last element of the skin biyad, but not with a kli, and a bunch of other things. And we're basically going to be finishing out that Mishnah. And then from there, we're going to be learning a new Mishnah, which speaks about what's referred to in the Gemara on Shabbos as an atzitz nakuv and an atzitz she'eno nakuv, a flower pot that has a hole in the bottom versus a flower pot that doesn't have a hole in the bottom, machlokes tanaim, and then certain gradations of tuma within one of those flower pots. So let's jump in. We're 5 lines from the bottom on Tzadi Dalet Amud Beis. Let's get started. Says the Gemara, B'chein hagodeles, also a woman who braids her hair. Let's see, these are 3 things that were listed in the Mishnah, 4 lines from the bottom of the page. Godeles, kocheles, upokeses. A woman who braids her hair, a woman who puts on makeup, and a woman who parts her hair. Mishum mai mechayva, what is it that they violated? So the Gemara recommends the following. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Avin, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Reb Chanina, Godeles mishum oreges, because of oreg. We spoke about weaving, that when a woman braids her hair, she's violating weaving. Kocheles mishum koseves, that when a woman is putting on makeup, it's as though she's writing, and that would be a violation of kosev, whoever would have thought. Pokeses mishum tove, and certain things that she would do with her hair, it has to do with blending together thread from the raw form into a thread form. Amru Rabbanon Kamed Rabbi Abo v'chi derech ariga bekach v'chi derech ksiva bekach v'chi derech tvia bekach. In order, rejecting all 3 of the havaminas of the shita of Rabbi Avin in the name of Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina. That's not normal. We don't say that a person is going to violate an Isser Doraisa on Shabbos when it's not the derech to do that malacha. When a woman's putting on makeup, it's the best example of the 3. When a woman is putting on makeup, that's not called kosev. You're not writing anything. You're not communicating anything. You're putting on makeup. It's not kosev. It's not the right language. And the Gemara rejects the first set of answers here by Rabbi Avin and goes with another one. They're both quoting from the same person. Both Rabbi Avin and Rabbi Abo are quoting from Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina, but Rabbi Abo's is more specific, and just capture the language here. I spoke to him about this myself, and he gave me pshat and what the isurim are for these three categories that come up in Mishnah. Turning to the top of Daf Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph, says the Gemara, kocheles mishum tzovas. That makes much more sense. Not kosei, but it's tzovea. It's basically dyeing your skin. It's staining. And the next 2 actually, Godeles upokes, working with one's hair, mishum boneh. Wow, whoever would have thought that adjusting one's hair on Shabbos in a more of a sophisticated way could violate the Isser of boneh. That's what the Gemara says, Rabbi Abo, in the name of his Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina. Asks the Gemara, v'chi derech binyan bekach. This is what you're going to call boneh? If you want to tell me that you're building a Lego tower and the pieces are impossible to get undone, and that's boneh, I got you, no problem. But braiding hair, fixing your hair is bona, very strange. So answers the Gemara yes, in fact, that is the case. And back in the end of Maseches Brachos, we actually saw this exact quote. Kididarash Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya. Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya taught the following: Vayiven Hashem Elokim esat sela. That when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was building Chava, he took one of the ribs of Adam Harishon and built Chava. Milamid, what do we learn from here? Shekila HaKadosh Baruch Hu lechava. HaKadosh Baruch Hu braided Chava, v'hevia eitzel Adam, and brought her to Adam Harishon. Shekain b'kir chayayam, in the islands of the oceans, koran lekiliasa b'niasa. They used to call the braiding of hair. They used to call it b'niasa, they used to call it building, and therefore that's the precedent of seeing that braiding is part of the world of boneh. Afal that it's not classical in the way we would typically understand the word boneh, but it certainly is the case that we see a link between braiding hair and between boneh. And with that, the Gemara says that that's the Isser of working with one's hair on Shabbos, not in general, not brushing hair like a simple hair, like a boy haircut. That's relatively easy. You're not braiding your hair. But for a woman who has long hair, then you could really engage some serious Isurim here. And that is why one should definitely be careful not to do so. 6 lines down, Tanya, the Brisa writes, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer Godelas Kocheles Upokeses Le'atzma Ptura. Huge qualification on our Mishnah. He says that that when a woman does these things to herself, when she braids her own hair, and when she puts on her own makeup, and when she parts her own hair, that's all ptura. That's all the Isser derabanan. When do we trigger the Isser deoraisa? Lechaverta chayeves. That's only if I were to do that for somebody else. Now, obviously, back in the day, the mirrors were very problematic. They certainly weren't good. Maybe not everybody had them. There were some potential halachic issues with the mirrors back in the day. There are some halachic issues now with mirrors if people are using them purely for gashmias reasons. Obviously, to look like a mensch, no problem, but to spend so much time looking at oneself in the mirror may have its own limitations in halacha. As well as mentioned in the poskim, back in the day, their mirrors were very, very sharp at the edges, and we were afraid that someone may be tempted to shave off something down to a place on the face or a place on the body where they're not allowed to shave. So that was a secondary concern. Either way, it seems very clear that in the times of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who was a Tana, that we were less concerned about a person putting on their own makeup and fixing up their own hair, and more concerned about doing so for one's friend. V'chein, and similarly, Rashi here, thankfully, qualifies this word v'chein. Normally, the word v'chein would say, and similarly, just like we just learned, so too something else. But take a look at Rashi v'chein, Dibur Hamaschil, the second line v'chein, Milsa Acharisi, the Shabbos le'isura. Don't think that this is another time that Reb Shimon ben Elazar is going to give us a leniency. He's actually teaching us a different isur that applies on Shabbos. Let's go back to the Gemara. V'chein, 8 lines down, Daf Tzadi Hamad Aleph. V'chein hay Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Isha lo savir sirak al paneha mimneshet tzovaz. Now, while it's true that Reb Shimon ben Elazar said that doing something for a friend is worse than doing something for yourself under these circumstances with the makeup and with the hair, it's not true by sraq. Sraq was a dye of sorts that a woman would use as like a foundational color. Didn't have to be perfectly put on in regards to makeup, eye makeup, whatever. Could be more generally rubbed in at the cheek to make the cheeks a particular color. So there, he didn't make the distinction of chaverta versus herself, the distinction that by oneself she'd be ptura, but by a friend she'd be chayaves. And here he just says that a woman should not put al panah on her own face, because that would be considered soveya. The Gemara here jumps to a totally different sugya of a collection of activities that are problematic. Now, we'll speak about one of them, which is very practical, halacha l'maisa, and is mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch and in the Mishnah Brura and the Bir Halacha, a whole big sugya. So let's get into this. Tanu Rabbanan hacholev, one who milks a cow, v'hamachabetz, one who, when milk is sitting in a cup, it can sometimes separate into different layers. If you separate that out, v'hamegavein, someone who makes cheese, kigrogris. Your violation on all of these is when you do so with the regular shear of Shabbos, which is the shear of a grogris. That's when you would violate the Isser. Hamechabet, someone who sweeps their house, referencing here homes that are made out of dirt floors. There it would be a problem of mashve gumos, and we spoke about this a couple of times already, that if you fix a hole inside your house, it's bona, and if you fix a hole outside your house, it's choresh in a field. The distinctions, of course, is based on function. In your house, you're not planting things, so what does it mean that you're fixing the ground? So that's a question of bona. So here, if you're machabed your house, if you take a broom, a bristled broom, and you're going to be sweeping dirt, it's going to smooth it out, and that's going to be halachically problematic. This was a technique that they did. Take a look at Rashi. It's about 8 lines down, 3 inches above where we are. Rashi says, what you would do is you'd sprinkle water all over the floor if it was very dusty in your house. In order to moisten the dirt that's on the ground so that it wouldn't kick up in the air and make it a little bit more difficult to breathe. That's called merabet. You're not allowed to do that. And a person who's going to extract honey from a honeycomb, that's also problematic on Shabbos. And here is how the distinction is then made from a halachic perspective. Shagag the Shabbos, if you did so b'shogeg on Shabbos, the din is chai v'chatos. Hazid b'yom tov, but if you did it on purpose on Yom Tov, loke arbaim, that would be an isur d'oraisa, dibur Rabbi Eliezer, v'chachamim omer mechad zeh v'echad zeinu el mishum shvus, and that's just a machlokes tanaim in regards to the status of all of these things, seemingly all of these things. There is what to discuss here about whether or not the whole list is included. Does the list go back all the way to Hacholev, or is it only talking about Hamachabed because it's post the Shir of Grogeris? So it's a little bit hard to tell. We would need some Rishonim to guide us here as to where the scope of the Machlokes is between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Nevertheless, Rabbi Eliezer holds that it is going to be Doraisa. And the Chachamim said both on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, Zeh b'zeh is going to be an Isser D'Rabbanan, it's Asr Mishum Shvus. Says the Gemara, Rav Nachman Bar Guria Ikla l'Naharda. Rav Nachman Bar Guria went up to the city of Naharda in Bavel. Bo Minei, and he asks the following question: Cholev Mishum Mai Mechayev, and he says to the base medrash Abosai. I should say that's not true. He spoke to one person. He spoke to. Doesn't say who he spoke to. Bar Guria, Ikla l'Naharda, Ba'u Minei. Oh, sorry. They said to him. The Talmidim said to him. That makes more sense. I apologize. Ba'u Minei. They said to him, Cholev Mishum Mai Mechayev. What is the isser of milking a cow on Shabbos? And he answers, Amar Lahu Mishum Cholev. We don't need a new name. That's its own isser. The isser is now cholev. You're not allowed to milk a cow because milking a cow is an isser doraisa. Not attaching it to any of the 39 malachos or a well-known tolda that we would have thought of. So the Gemara is going to be bothered by this shortly. But let's continue first. Mechavet, separating out the parts of the milk. Mishumai mechayev. Amar lahu Rav Nachman Bar Guria says mishum mechavet. It's the same name. You're not allowed to separate out the milk product. Megave, making cheese, mishum mai mechayev, amar lahu mishum megave. So then they said a line to him that was very sharp. He wanted to say that each of these three isurim that we just discussed all of them are going to be their own isurim. You have cholev, and you have mechabetz, and you have megave. Amru lehi, they said to him a very sharp line. Rabcha katil kani be'agmahava. Was your Rebbe one of the people whose profession was to cut the reeds at the bottom of the lake? Namely, was he someone who had absolutely no clue what was going on? Rashi here says as much in Dibur Hamaschel Katil Kani Ba'agma. Take a look at Rashi, a third of the way down in the Rashis. Rashi says, Chotech Kini Min Ha'agam Havalo Yoda Lefarish Mishnah. Come on, these are basic things. These are basic ideas. There's no malacha called cholev. Everybody look on Ayin Gimel. There's no malacha called cholev. There's no malacha called megabin. What is he talking about, Bichlal? Therefore, asa shal be medrasha. So they brought the shaila to the base medrash. Amru le, they said to him, cholev chayiv mishum mefarik. That we recognize, a word that we know. Mefarik is a tolda of dash. It's in the world of borer. And for a person to be cholev, what you're doing is you're separating out the milk from the udder, from the body of the cow. And in doing so, that is problematic. We'll see later in the Gemara in Chulin that this is really very problematic. How is one allowed to eat an udder? If a whole cow is kosher, but the udder was saturated with milk, and the way that the udders are made is that there are small little pockets that hold on to the milk until the animal is able to suck out the milk itself. So then it would pull from those small pockets. But until that point, there were still plenty of pockets. So how could you then eat an udder? It's filled with milk. So the Gemara there in Chulin says you have to cut it shesiv arev, you have to press it against the wall. And that's why we call it mefarik. There is some type of absorption that exists in the flesh of the udder, and that's why it is mefarik. Mechavetz, right halfway down on the page, Sadi Hayamanal, mechavetz, separating out the parts of the milk, chayiv mishum borer. You're not allowed to separate, as we discussed in the Gemara in Ayin Dalet. Megaben chayiv mishum boneh. And for a person to make cheese, they're going to be chayiv on boneh. What about the next part of the Gemara that we learned above, the Torah Satanoim that we saw above? Hamechabed, hamerabetz, v'haroda chalos tvash. We saw above that you're not allowed to sweep, that you're not allowed to put water down to prevent dust from kicking up, and you're not allowed to extract honey from a honeycomb. Shagag b'Shabbos chayiv chatos hezi b'yom tov lo karbaim divrei Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar was of the opinion that all of these things are isurei d'oraisa, and we saw it's not quoted here, but as we saw above, the Chachamim argued and said it's all d'Rabbanan. So then says the Gemara, Amar Reb Elazar the Amora, Reb Elazar the Amora. We've seen this now multiple times in the last couple of days. Rabbi Elazar the Amora is giving pshat in Rabbi Eliezer the Tana. My taima de Rabbi Eliezer. Why is it that Rabbi Eliezer holds that there is an iser doraisa of extracting honey from a honeycomb? Think about it. It's not like tearing off a leaf from a tree, an orange from a tree. It's not the same thing. The honey's resting inside the honeycombs, but it's not really connected. We normally define tolesh and kotzer by severing something from its life source, but honey doesn't grow. So where did he get it from? Where did Rabbi Eliezer come up with this idea that roda chalos dvash, that extracting honey from a honeycomb is an isur doraisa? Sure enough, the Gemara answers with a pasuk. T'chsiv, 2/3 of the way down, vayitbol osabi ya'aros dvash, in the forests of honey. V'chima inyan ya'ar, Eitzel dvash. What is the link between a forest and honey? That's not the way honey is collected. That's not the way honey is generated. So why does the pasuk connect the two? Elalomar lach. What do we see from this pasuk? We see an equivalence. Ma ya'ar hatolesh mimenu b'Shabbos chayv chatos. Just like in a forest, if you pull anything off of a tree in a forest, you're going to be chayv chatos. An isser dorais of tolesh, of kotzer, of separating something from its life source. Chalos dvash harodim mimenu b'Shabbos chayv chatos. So too, based on a drasha. The only reason why there's an Isser Dorais is because there's a drasha. Otherwise, we would not have said that there's an Isser Dorais of taking honey out of a honeycomb. It doesn't seem like the right profile. At the end of the day, you're not really separating something from its life source. Nevertheless, because of this pasuk, that's why Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion, says Rabbi Eliezer, the Amora, the Rabbi Eliezer, the Tana, was of the opinion that extracting honey from a honeycomb is an Isser Dorais because of this pasuk of Yaros Tvash. Says the Gemara, the last two lines of the shorter lines, Ameimar Shara Zilcha b'Mechoza. The city of Mechoza was a little bit more well built out, and the floors in their homes are like the floors in our homes, which is that they are solidly made. We don't live in homes of dirt. And therefore, in that home, Ameimar was Shara Zilcha. He allowed them to sprinkle some water on the ground. Take a look at Rashi, Dibra Hamaschil Zilcha, a little bit more than halfway down, 2/3 of the way down. The Rabbi Tzabais. They were allowed to put water down to prevent dust from kicking up. But says Rashi, B'ritzpas Avanim Haisa B'chol Ha'ir. All of the homes in that town were made with solid flooring, solid stone. So we didn't have to worry about any of the Isurim about preparing the ground for planting, either about Boneh or about Choresh. It says the Gemara, after Ameimar's leniency, which applied in the city of Mechoza, remember that Mechoza is different than other cities because Mechoza was a city where all the floors were made out of stone. Why were the Chachamim concerned? Amar, Taima Mai Amar Rabbanan. Why is it that the rabbis were concerned about this at all? So it says the Gemara, Dilma Asila Ashvuya Gumos. Maybe they were concerned about, if you put some water down on the ground and maybe if you step on it, it'll soften and you're smoothing out the ground. That's mashve gumos. And inside a home, that's going to be the Isser of Boneh. But hacha leka gumos. But here, there are no rivets. There are no divots in a person's home. It's a home. It's made out of stone. It's like my wood floor right here. I don't have to worry about mashve gumos. That's not a thing. I don't have to worry about it at all. So here, the poskim discuss whether or not there is an Isser Derabanan to sweep a house on Shabbos. Do we say that there's an Isser to sweep a person's house on Shabbos, out of concern of a home that isn't made out of a solid floor? So the Bir Halacha paskins that it's mutter, that we are, of course, allowed to sweep our homes on Shabbos because of that. Now, one of the nafkaminas might be, and one should be very concerned about this, is that if your sukkah, ledugma, if your sukkah is built on grass, you should not be sweeping that on Shabbos and Yantiv. That could be a real Isser Doraisa. That could be this din. That could be this din of HaMechabed, that according to Rabbi Eliezer is an Isser Doraisa on Shabbos. We pass like the Chachamim that it would be an Isser Derabanan, but nevertheless, that's a real concern here. The first of the very long lines, Sadi Hayam and Aleph, Rabba Tosfa, a person. Ashkeche the Ravina, the Kamitztar Mehevla. Maybe he had asthma. Ravina was having a very hard time breathing in his house. There was just some dust that was kicking up, having a hard time breathing. Some say it wasn't him. Some say Mark Shisha Berei de Rava, Ashkeche the Ravashi. That Mark Shisha Berei de Rava, he found Ravashi, the Kamitztar Mehevla. He was having a hard time from all of the dirt that was kicked up in the air. Amar Lei, don't you know what we learned? Amar Lei, Lo Saval Amar Lahadetanya, don't you believe in the Mishnah that we've learned? In the Brisa, Harotza l'Rabbi sets beso, a person who wants to water down the dust in his house, what should he do? B'Shabbos, he should maybe a reva malei amayim berochetz panav v'zavis zu. He should wash his face in one corner, and then he should go to another corner and yada v'zavizu and wash his hands in the other corner. Ragla b'zavizu, wash your feet in still the third corner. And then what you'll find is that that's perfect, a great solution. You weren't being merabetz on purpose, you just were washing your hands, but some of the water, some of the particles of water, some of the droplets are going to end up on the floor, and it will minimize the amount of dirt. So he said back to Ravashi, or to whoever the person was to whom this happened to, that it was hard to breathe. Why are you not doing what everybody else does, which is they came up with this workaround to make sure that all the dust on the ground was going to be kept at bay? So he says, I've never heard that Bryce before. Thank you for sharing with me. Now I know. It's a wonderful solution. Tana, the Tanaim teach us, Isha Chachma merabetzes beisa b'Shabbos. A woman who is wise will find out a way to be merabetzes as beisa, to keep the dust down in her house by finding a clever way to wash her hands, to wash dishes, to wash whatever she's washing. and using the droplets of water to minimize the exposure. And adds in the Gemara 4 lines from the bottom, the last line before the Mishnah. And nowadays, the Sviralon Kirib Shimon, Shari Afilu Lechatchila. And nowadays that we hold like the opinion of Reb Shimon, we'll see which Reb Shimon we're talking about. But nowadays that we hold like Reb Shimon, Shari Afilu Lechatchila, a woman is now, anyone is now allowed to be Merabbe to the bias. You could sprinkle water Lechatchila in a house, even that's made out of dirt. And why? Which Reb Shimon are we talking about? So yesterday we spent some time speaking about Malacha She'ein Tzricha Legufa. There, famously, there's a machlokas Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, and in yesterday's Mishnah, according to some of the Rishonim, Tosfos, as we saw on the bottom of Tzadi Dalet Amud Aleph, highlighted the fact that on the Mishnah on the bottom of Tzadi Gimel Amud Beis, that was Rabbi Shimon's Mari Makom, that Amalacha Shein Tzricha Legufa is patur. So that's one world of Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. But here, that's not the Rabbi Shimon that we're talking about. Take a look at Rashi. Dibur Hamaschel Ki Rabbi Shimon, 6-7 lines from the bottom of the page on Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph, says Rashi, to Davar Shein Miskavein Mutter, that it is permissible to do something when you don't have intention for an Isser to come about, and it's not for sure that the Isser is going to come about. Continues Rashi, the davar she'ein miskaven mutter, the hamerabetz enu miskaven lahadbik afar big guma ulahashvos habayis. Your goal is not to fill the potholes in your home. You're just trying to keep the dirt down. If it happens to be derech agav, that maybe just as an ancillary result of what you're doing, that you end up fulfilling a hole because you were suppressing some of the dirt, so be it. That's called davar she'ein miskaven. Now there too we had a machlokas tanaim between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, and unlike in the world of Malacha Shein Tzricha Legufa, where Rabbi Yehuda said it was chayiv and Rabbi Shimon said it was pater, here in the world of davar she'ein miskaven, Rabbi Yehuda says it's chayiv and Rabbi Shimon says it's mutter, totally different. So therefore, and this is how the Gemara concludes, you are allowed to sprinkle that water lightly on the ground in a home that's made out of dirt. Seemingly that's the case. That's the pashtus of the Gemara. We'd be allowed to do that on Shabbos, and we would not be concerned about mashvegumos because that's not the direct result. It's only a secondary result, and it's not definite. It's not a psik resha. The world of Reb Shimon by davar she'ein miskaven doesn't apply by a psik resha. Doesn't apply when something is definitely going to happen, and because it's not definitely going to happen, that by sprinkling water, by being merabetz to keep the dust down, because it's not definitely going to happen, that one will then fill in a hole in the ground, so therefore it's permissible. And that brings us to the Mishnah, 4 lines from the bottom of the page. As mentioned, this Mishnah, and for the rest of the blot until the bottom of Tzadi Hey Amud Beis, so 4 or 5 lines from the bottom, is going to be discussing an Atzitz Nakuv versus an Atzitz She'eino Nakuv. As a 30-second background, an Atzitz Nakuv is a flower pot that has a hole in the bottom. These are the flower pots that we would buy. They have an orange color to them. They have a hole in the bottom, and we typically would they'd be potted plants, and we would pour in some water, and the water, small, whatever's left over, would drip out of the bottom. Now, if that is sitting on the ground outside, we treat that halachically as though it's planted in the ground. And if on Shabbos you pick that up, you might be chayiv midoraisa. But if the flower pot has no hole on the bottom, known as a atzitz she'eino nakuv, it's a flower pot that has no hole, and it's sitting on the ground, and then you picked it up, you're not severing anything because there's no hole on the bottom, so there's nothing to make it connected to the ground. Our Mishnah opens as follows: Hatolesh me'atzitz nakuv chayiv. If a person separates, if you tear something out of a flower pot that has a hole, chayiv, that's tolesh, because it's considered connected to the ground. V'she'eino nakuv pater. If you have an isolated flower pot, like let's say one in your house, and it's not above ground from the outside, it's just in a flower pot that has no hole in the bottom, and you separate from there, that's pater avalasr, that's an isser derabanan. We would not say that that's kotzer doraisa because it's not connected to the ground. Says the Gemara, it says the Mishnah of Reb Shimon poter bazeh uvazeh. Reb Shimon has a more expansive leniency in that both cases are going to be pater avalasr, even if you tear a leaf off of a flower where it's atzitz nakuv, even if there is a hole on it, on the bottom of it, and it's sitting on the ground, afal pi, that it is connected to the ground, he still treats that as pater avalasr, as an isser derabanan. Says the Gemara, Rami le Abaye le Rava. Abaye, 4th century of Amoraim, asks a question to Rava. The Amrila, some people say that it was not in the 4th century, it was in the 1st and 2nd centuries, really the 1st century. The Amrila, Reb Chia bar Rav le Rav. So this is, again, a historical timeline question of when was this sugya actually discussed? Was it discussed halfway through the times of the Amoraim with the famous Abaye and Rava, or no? Was it a shir that happened with one of the Talmidim of Rabbi very early on in the Amoraim, with Rab. Unknown. We don't know the history here. Nevertheless, what was stated? Tanan, if you look in our Mishnah, what does our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says, Reb Shimon poter bazel vazeh. Reb Shimon said that an atzitz nakub and an atzitz she'eno nakub, a flower pot with a hole on the bottom and a flower pot without a hole on the bottom, that there seemingly halachically is no difference. Alma, what do we see from this Mishnah, from our Mishnah? Alma nakuv l'Reb Shimon kishe'eno nakuv mashvile. He says that the flower pot with the hole is no different than the flower pot without the hole. There's no difference at all. If that's the case, last line of Tzadi Hey Amad Aleph, Uraminhu, but if that's the case, then our Mishnah goes up against another source in the Tanaim. What is that next source in the Tanaim? That is a Tosefta in Kilayim. Reb Shimon Omer, Ein bein nakuv l'she'eno nakuv. So far, so good, because that was our assertion from our Mishnah. That was a diuk that we made. It's not really a diuk. He says that there's pater in both, but that's what Rav or Rabbi and Rava were talking about, that Reb Shimon would say that there's no difference between them. The problem is that the line doesn't end here. And as we turn to the top of Tzadi Hayamid Beis, the Gemara then continues in this Tosefta Ella. The only difference that exists between an atzitz nakub and an atzitz she'eno nakub is lahachsher zroin bilvad. The only difference is whether or not they're subject to the rules of tuma, of transferring tuma. As we know, something that's been separated from the ground, they are subject to tuma of yad shachatam, of yayin, dam, and just go through all the letters, all the 7 liquids, that those things can transfer tuma. However, if something is still connected to the ground, then there is no transferring of tuma. So this line that we saw here in Kilayim, this last line that turns us to the top of Tzadi Hamid Beis, says the Reb Shimon does make a distinction in regards to atzitz nakuv and atzitz she'eno nakuv. What's the distinction? That by an atzitz, which is nakuv, there's no eligibility, there's no susceptibility for tuma. But when it's an atzitz she'eno nakuv, when there's no hole in it, then it's its own animal. It's not connected to the ground, and then it is susceptible to tuma. So that would be the difference. So then, which one is it? Is it like Rav's assertion that there's really no difference between the world of atzitz nakuv and atzitz eno nakuv, which was how our Mishnah seemed to present? Or no, is the Tosefta and Kilayim correct in indicating that really there is a slight difference, and that is that when the flower pot has no hole in it, then it's considered like a piece of fruit that's taken off a tree because it's not connected to the ground, and therefore it's susceptible to tuma. Which one is it? Omar Lei, he says back to the, again, we don't know who's talking. It's either Abai to Rava or Chia to Rav. We don't know who's talking now. L'chol mili, according across the boards, Reb Shimon kitalosh mashvile. Reb Shimon treats the atzitz, which is naku, which has a hole in it, just like the one that's totally severed from the ground. He treats them the same. The shiny le'inyan tuma. But when it comes to susceptibility of tuma and the distinction that was made in the Tosefta and Kilayim, it's true that there's a difference, but that wasn't because of the lumdus of Reb Shimon. That was because, third line, the Torah rivsa tahara itzal zerayim. That's because of the Torah forced his hand. But in lumdus, there is no difference between, let's say, in regards to tolesh, in regards to kosher. There's no difference for Reb Shimon in regards to whether or not you pluck a flower that's in a flower pot in your house, or if you pluck a flower in a flower pot that's sitting on your porch. That's hovering over the ground. No difference at all. They're identical. It just happens to be that the Mishnah in Kilayim, the Tosefta in Kilayim, is referencing an area that Reb Shimon, outside of his control, the pasuk just includes susceptibility of tuma to a flower pot that is eino naku, to a flower pot that really is separated. And what is the pasuk that supports this? Shneimar, 4th line, al kol zera zerua asher yizareh. Okay, and on everything that's planted, which is now no longer connected to the ground, there we're going to have a susceptibility to tuma. Asked the Gemara, well, there was an older gentleman who asked a question of Reb Zera, 4th century of Amorai. Shoresh keneged nekev mali amar Reb Shimon. What would Reb Shimon say? We know that Reb Shimon really doesn't make a distinction between a flower pot which has a hole in it and a flower pot which doesn't. But we're testing the limits here with Reb Zera. Let's see. The root is literally sitting right at the opening of the flower pot's hole on the bottom. And it's mamish right there touching the ground. How far does Reb Shimon go in his saying that something that's that an atzitz nakuv, then a flower pot that has a hole, is really the same as well? Is that really the same? There's a root growing out of the bottom touching the ground. Come on, like at some point it's got to be stuck to the ground. Now it's got to be connected. Says the Gemara, Reb Zera responded, ishtik, he didn't respond, v'lo amar le v'lo midi, he didn't know what to say. Zim nechada, another time Reb Zera was giving shir, ashkechei.
Sabba's Eliyahu.
Oh.
Sabba's Eliyahu.
Okay, great, thank you. So then another time, Reb Zera was giving shir. Zimna chada ashkeche de Yosef the kamar umod Reb Shimon shem nike bichtei taraso. And there was another shir that Reb Zera gave in regards to this shita of Reb Shimon, and he said there that sheim nike bichtei taraso, that if in fact there was a hole that was made in the kli, that it no longer has the status of the kli. Amar lei. Now this Saba, this older gentleman, says to Reb Zera, hashta shorash keneged nekev boiminach. I asked you about this question where you weren't sure what the status of the atzitz nakuv was, or this flower pot that had a hole where the root was right at the opening at the bottom of the flower pot. You weren't sure, and you didn't answer me velo amrsli velo midi. But then nikev, now there's a tiny little hole in the flower pot, and everything changes in regards to the status of the kli. Nikev bichdei ta'araso mibaya. That, come on, that's a tiny little hole, and now it doesn't have the status of a kli anymore. But when there's a big hole that has a root sticking there in the ground, you're still not willing to say that Reb Shimon would make a distinction between a natzitz nakuv and natzitz she'enu nakuv. Doesn't make any sense. Amar Abaye comes to save the day. The Itmar, if you're going to quote Reb Zera, you got to do it right. The Itmar lahad Reb Zera hachi hu de Itmar. This is how we should understand Reb Zera. Umo de Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon would agree. She'im nikev. I agree, says Reb Zera. Abaye speaking for him. I agree that there is a flower pot which is no longer a kli, and that is a flower pot that has a hole in it, but not any hole, but a hole that would make it impossible for the kli to hold a revis of liquid. And that's where the hole is. It's low enough, let's call it a centimeter from the bottom, so that, and the girth is small enough that it's not able to hold a revis anymore. So that's how Abaye teaches, and therefore it's just a fundamental aspect to a kli, that if a kli can't hold a revis, but it's not machzik revis, it's not a kli. And that's how Abaye solves this seemingly strange question from the Saba, from Eliyahu Navi. Halfway down Tzadi Hey Amud Beis. Amar Rava, just a little micro sugya in the world of Tumah V'Tara. Says Rava, Chamesh midos bekli cheres. There are 5 measures in regards to a kli cheres. What does it mean? There are 5 measures. This is going to be sequential in order from the lowest level of tuma status, kind of increasing to the greatest level of tuma. So let's get started. Amar Rava, Chamesh midos bekli cheres. Number 1, nikev kemotzi mashke. Let's say that there's a tiny little hole in a glass such that a liquid would leak out of it. It's a tiny little hole. So then there, the Gemara says in the name of Rava, Tahar milatame gistra. At that point, if ever this became shards, then it would never be tamei ever again. This little hole ruins the gistra, ruins the shards. However, while it's still a kli, while it's still in the shape that it's in, this is still a kli which would be considered valid for making the mechatas of mixing the efer hapara and the water for the sake of the para aduma. Nikev kikones mashka. Let's say the hole is a little bit larger. It's not so small that it's not only so small that it lets liquid out, but it's big enough that when there's water pressure from the outside, it pushes water in. It's a little bit of a bigger hole. So there, tahor milakadesh bo mechatas. Then the kli is no longer, tahor means, it's a funny usage. Tahor means that it's no longer a kli. It's no longer functional as a kli. It's not subject to tuma is really the real halachic explanation. So tahor milakadesh bo mechatas. There, we can no longer consider this to be a kli in regards to the mechatas. The adayin, however, it still is a kli hu lahachsher bo zerayim. It still is considered a kli in regards to something that would grow in there, as we spoke about on the top of the page, something that would grow in there and be susceptible to tuma in regards to the yad shachadam, the 7 liquids that would make something susceptible for tuma. Nikev kishorish katan. What if it was still bigger? It wasn't only the small hole of a leak where water can get out, and it wasn't the slightly bigger hole where water can get in, but it was actually big enough, nikev kishorish katan, where a root could grow through that hole. So there, tahor milahachsher bo zerayim. Then this utensil will lose its capacity to grow something that has the status of being machsher tuma. Nothing that grows in there would be susceptible to tuma. The hole's too big. However, where would it still be valid? V'adayin kli hu lekabel bo zeisim, but it would still be considered a kli as it relates to collecting olives. What happens if the hole was still bigger? Nikev kemotzi zeisim. What if the hole was the size of an olive? So then, tahor milakabel bo zeisim, this utensil is no longer valid in regard, it's no longer a kli as it relates to zeisim. However, v'adayin kli hu lekabel bo rimonim, but it still is a kli as it relates to pomegranates. Last but not least, nikev kemotzi rimonim, if the hole is larger than that of a pomegranate, so then tahor miklum, then it's no longer a kli under any circumstances whatsoever. Very interestingly, what would happen if there was a vessel? If you can imagine one of those vessels that has an opening at the top, it kind of looks like a wine like a wine decanter, kind of wider at the bottom. Let's just envision that. So it says the Gemara as follows: V'im hukaf tzamid psil. So let's say that it's the top of it's wrapped up. Would it be tamei mace? Would it become tamei in a tumas ohel of a mace if a person dies in that house? The top of it is sealed, but there's a hole on the side. So that's an interesting shaila. Says the Gemara, "V'im hukaf samid psil ad yivchas rubo." No, the only way tumas mace enters into a kli is through the opening with which it was made. And therefore, let's say that this were to be the case. I'm holding my cup of tea, and the opening is here, but it's sealed. I seal it with something, perfectly sealed. So no tumas mace could get in here, but there's a hole in the side. The halacha is that the contents are still going to be considered totally fine, no tumas mace. And so a lot of these laws of Tuma V'Tara are halachos that are kind of beyond the pale for us in regards to Svara. A lot of them are not Svaradik at all. They're all based on Psukim. So that's what the Gemara means here, that Achi Yivchas Rubo, until 51% of the utensil is ruined, then all of the contents inside of that Kli would still be considered tahor. It would not be tamei mace. Even sitting next to a dead body would not be tamei mace, provided that the natural opening of the kli was in fact covered. We'll stop here. We'll pick up tomorrow night, Emir Tashem, with Daf Tzadi Vav, and I hope that you all have a beautiful